So I very recently put out a review for Curry Barker's brilliant batshit offering to horror cinema, Obsession, of which I said, Obsession is one of the best horror movies I've seen in a really long time. And while I fully stand by that, I actually have to make a little confession. When I was first putting that review together, what I had originally written for myself to say was, this is the best horror film I have seen in a really long time. However, between writing the script for that video and actually sitting down to film it, I almost on a complete whim decided to catch an afternoon showing of Kane Parsons' Backrooms. Now, full disclosure here, I am in no way familiar with the lore that exists around this film. I knew nothing about the creepypasta, I have never seen any of the short films, so this was really not on my radar at all. In fact, when I first saw the trailer for this movie, there was a split second where I was absolutely terrified that this was going to be an adaptation of House of Leaves. A book that how do I put this?
Loathe entirely.
I am not a big fan. So when the actual title popped up and I did some research into what it actually was, not only was I immediately relieved, but I was fascinated. And once I actually got to see the movie, I realized as I was shooting my video for Obsession that I was going to have to amend my original statement. Now, I do not want to make it seem as if I am demoting Obsession or knocking any points off of it because I think it's pretty much a masterpiece and a perfect horror movie. However, as far as best horror movies I've seen in a while, it now has to share that trophy with Backrooms. Because Backrooms is an astonishing, subversive, wholly unique work of genius. It is a perfect psychological horror movie that took me back to the first time I saw Stanley Kubrick's The Shining or David Lynch's Mulholland Drive. The kind of movies that make you feel like you're watching a dream projected onto film. Movies that aren't afraid to be surreal or to challenge the audience without ever leaving them behind and still managing to scare the shit out of them. But before I totally run away with my feelings for this film, let's get into the plot. Or try to, anyway. First of all, we gotta talk about the beginning sequence. Only because I think it's both hilarious and super interesting that this film begins how most found footage horror movies end. We begin with a man dressed in a hazmat suit as he literally carries us in a 2-minute tracking shot through the back rooms. A strange and seemingly endless series of rooms filled with random pieces of furniture and buzzing fluorescent lights. Everything we're seeing being recorded through the handheld camera the man is holding as he navigates the space. And we pick up very quickly that not only has the man become separated from his team and is unable to communicate with them, but he is being followed. By what? We don't know. But imagine, if you will, the ending of such films as The Blair Witch Project, Wreck, Cloverfield, or any of the Paranormal Activity films. We get the final showdown between the character who's been holding the camera and whatever foe has been pursuing them. The camera drops to the ground, cuts to black, and the audience is left wondering, wait, it's over? What the f***? But here, instead of the credits rolling, the movie itself actually begins, with we the audience now left to wonder how the film is going to explain what we just saw, or rather, what we didn't see. And it's here that we're introduced to our main character, Clark, played by Chiwetel Ejiofor. Clark lives in what appears to be 1990s California. Apparently the movie was filmed primarily in Vancouver, but I could swear up and down that I saw palm trees throughout. It's not important. Clark owns and operates a discount furniture emporium, one of those places you see in every dying shopping plaza you've ever been in. And it's not long at all that we realize that Clark's life is about as empty as the store he's running. And he is not a happy person. We learn that he's a failed architect. Don't tell him that. His store is eating up all of his money. His employees don't really seem to like him. He has an alcohol problem. And if all that's not enough, he's currently crashing in the store, sleeping in a showroom bed ever since he was kicked out of the house that he and his wife shared following a bitter divorce, which we get the details of through a conversation Clark has with his therapist, played by Renata Reinsve. There's a really great moment when, during their session, his therapist, her name is Mary in the movie, asks Clark to basically reenact the last argument he had with his wife. And we watch as Clark starts to relive this moment from his past, becoming increasingly more angry and hostile as he does. This is a brilliant way to deliver exposition, but more importantly, it shows us that Clark isn't just unhappy, he's not a good person. It's a brilliantly acted and wonderfully directed sequence, not only for how it dresses Clark down as a person, but how it introduces us to Mary as a character. We come to learn quite a lot about her as the movie goes along. She's a professional therapist with a major book deal and is by all accounts very successful, but we also glean that she is unhappy as well. We get little clues and snippets into her past as the film progresses, and how despite being a far more sympathetic person than Clark, they are in many ways alike. They're both trapped, effectively stuck in a Mobius strip of their own lives, with routines, burdens, traumas, and repeated behaviors that they just can't seem to break away from. And it's through these subtle but very illuminating character moments that I first found myself realizing what this movie actually was and what it was actually talking about, which is right when the plot itself kicks into gear. One night, while Clark is working/crashing at the store, he finds a strange and seemingly impossible doorway, literally just a space in the wall that he can put his hands through, and finds himself inside the titular back rooms, a yellow wallpapered and yellow lit complex of rooms that seemingly go on forever. And after recovering from his initial shock, Clark begins exploring this labyrinth, going from room to room, in real time I might add, each space more bizarre than the last and strewn about with random items. I almost wish that I had thought to set a timer during this sequence because it goes on for quite some time. Although I never felt it because, like Clark, I was so entranced by this strange, nonsensical world we had just entered, and I was both terrified and curious to know what lay beyond each new door. Almost like Narnia meets Office Space.
Impossible.
But what truly fascinated me about this sequence was that it felt, perhaps more than any other movie I've ever seen, like being inside of a dream. Not only because of the strangeness and the illogic of it, how the longer and deeper it goes, the more surreal it becomes and the less sense it seems to make, but because I have dreams like this all the time. Dreams where I enter a house or a space, and as I wander from room to room, I start to notice that it just keeps going, getting bigger and weirder with absolutely no end in sight. And whatever it is that I may have been looking for initially goes right out of my head, with my new and only objective being to explore the space. I found myself being lulled into a weird sense of nostalgia, almost comfort by this sequence, because it just so reminded me of the feelings I experience when I have these dreams. And I think that's exactly what Parsons wants to instill in the audience, so that as we watch Clark become increasingly obsessed with exploring the back rooms, we can't help but understand where he's coming from, because we, in spite of ourselves, are just as curious to know what lies beyond each new corner. And Clark does become increasingly obsessed. He starts mapping out the back rooms. He tries to tell his therapist about it and eventually attempts to convince others to go in with him. But the deeper Clark goes and the longer he stays, the more it becomes clear that his presence is affecting the environment, and more importantly, he is not alone in there. If I had to compare this movie to anything, it would be Alex Garland's Annihilation, which also features characters, and very flawed characters at that, entering this strange new dimension that not only has an altering effect on them, but they do on it as well. But while in Annihilation, these characters are exploring this massive, beautiful, natural landscape, Backrooms is a kaleidoscope of the most depressing office complex you've ever been in. It's claustrophobic, sterile, and stifling. The only thing missing is the giant chunky printer.
That's what I need. Let's do that. Let's do exactly that, you little fuck.
I honestly feel bad for anyone who saw this and then had to go to their office job the next day. Like, this looks familiar. Now, as much detail as I'm going into about the strangeness of the backrooms and the characters themselves, I'm still barely scratching the surface when it comes to where this film ultimately goes. And I certainly have no intention of going anywhere near spoiler territory, not only because everyone who sees this deserves to experience it as blindly as possible, but also because I think this film in many ways functions as a kind of Rorschach test for the audience. And if you don't know what that is, let me just ask you this. What do you see in this image? This is a film that the less you know going into it, the more you're likely to project your own theories, your own ideas, even your own life experiences onto it, which I think is exactly what Kane Parsons and screenwriter Will Sudik want. But not in a way that feels lazy, where the filmmakers are just hoping the audience will create a meaning instead of them actually providing one. Rather, it feels like Parsons and Sudik have created a world that is so big and so complex that while there are definitely explanations for what is happening, we're not going to end up with a bow-wrapped manual explaining everything to us in fine print. So we, the audience, have to do some work as we go. We have to piece together the clues and the breadcrumbs that the filmmakers have left for us, all the while wondering when the hell this movie's boogeyman is going to jump out from behind a corner.
Pull me up, pull me up, pull me up! What do you see?
I absolutely love this film. I think it is an astonishing accomplishment for a debut feature. And for those of you who don't know, Kane Parsons was 20 years old when he directed this movie, and that baffles me. Not because I don't think young people are capable of great things, I invite you to Google how old Spielberg was when he directed Jaws, but because there were so many points in this film where I was just marveling at how confident the direction was. I feel like there are so many debut films where you can almost sense the insecurity or the inexperience of a new director. You can feel where they need to grow and still need to find their voice. And that is not the case here. This feels like something Kubrick or Lynch would have made in the heyday of their careers for just how sound its construction is. Parsons is undoubtedly undoubtedly an amazing talent, and I truly hope this is the beginning of a meteoric rise for him. Now, all that said, as brilliant as I think this movie is, I know it's not going to be everyone's cup of tea, particularly when it comes to its ending. Even as I was watching it and really liking what it was doing, part of me was waiting for them to drop the ball at any moment, like, okay, here's where they overplay their hand and they lose me. And that just never happened. I truly felt like I understood what the movie was doing, and I liked how it was choosing to do it, but I could tell that not everyone was going to feel the same way. And sure enough, the more tepid reviews I've seen for this film all point right at the ending. How it doesn't answer enough, how it tries to answer too much, or just how tonally they don't find it consistent with what came before. And I can't exactly say that they're wrong about this shift, but for some reason or other, it just didn't bother me. I didn't feel it was inconsistent, and if anything, it opened up even more questions for the audience to have to ponder. And I love films that are brave enough to do that, and are not afraid to go out on an open-ended note. Almost like the characters and filmmakers alike are saying, hey, you now know just as much as we do, and unfortunately, we don't have all the answers. At least not yet. And not everyone is going to be okay with that, and that's fine. But I can't criticize the movie for that because I don't think the ambiguity of the ending feels unearned or like a cop-out. It feels like there's a lot more of this world to be explored, whether in another film potentially or just in our imagination. And I am perfectly okay with either. But whether or not we do get a follow-up, as a standalone piece of art, Backrooms is a complete triumph. When it comes to horror, this is one of the most effective and daring entries to the genre I've seen in a very long time. It is genuinely frightening throughout, with I think 1, maybe 2 jump scares in all.
Black!
Which is worth a mountain of praise in and of itself. But as with all great horror, it's what lies beneath the scary trappings that makes this film truly unique and profound. It's a magnificent exploration of the human mind, of both its amazing capabilities and its catastrophic frailties. How we construct our own realities to protect ourselves from pain, from failure, from accountability, and how in trying so hard to protect ourselves, we can become trapped in our own perpetual maze, without ever growing or living to our full potential. I truly cannot praise this film enough. As a horror fan, as someone with a psychology degree, and someone who just loves great filmmaking. It's beautifully shot, it's inventive, it's creepy, it boasts a career best performance from Ejiofor, and 1 week later, I am still thinking about this movie and unpacking it. Backrooms is absolutely one of the best movies I've seen this year, horror or otherwise, and I cannot wait to dive into it again and look for the innumerable details and clues that I know I missed the first time. But in the meantime, thank you so much for joining me on what I know is probably one of my longer movie chats. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe to support my baby YouTube channel, and please let me know in the comments what you thought of Kane Parsons' Backrooms. Thank you again for joining me, and I will see you next time.